I had no idea what I was walking into when I got the job at Gus's Diner. The ad had looked harmless enough. Waitstaff wanted, night shift, all welcome, must be comfortable with unusual circumstances. It wasn't the wording that intrigued me, though. It was the pay. A whopping $25 an hour for a midnight to dawn shift? In this economy, how could I say no? The diner itself was located on the outskirts of town, nestled between a few abandoned buildings and the edge of a thick forest. The exterior looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Cracked neon signs, chipped paint, a few flickering streetlights hanging above. Yet, when I walked inside for my first shift, I immediately felt something different. The air had a distinct, almost nostalgic feel, a comfortable warmth that felt oddly familiar. The flickering neon sign above the door buzzed, but it wasn't the only light in the diner. The warm glow from the lamps scattered around the room made the place feel almost timeless. The inside was small, booths lined up on either side, a long counter with stools and a few old jukeboxes tucked in the corners. The place smelled like coffee, bacon, and the faint scent of something earthy, like damp leaves. The kind of smell you associate with an old family diner, comforting and worn in. The walls were covered with decades of memorabilia, faded photos, old movie posters, vintage menus, and the jukebox softly played old rock tunes in the background. It had a charm to it, for sure. The woman who greeted me, an older lady with thick glasses and a stern look, introduced herself as Alice. Her hair was perfectly pinned in a tight bun, her uniform crisp and immaculate, and her gaze was sharp, piercing. She handed me my apron and set me to work without a word. I wasn't sure what exactly she expected of me, but I was more than happy to get started. The shift was supposed to be simple enough: serve coffee, take orders, and keep the place running. But then, things started to get weird. The first customer that night was a man who looked off. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made me look twice. He was pale, almost translucent, and his skin had the slight grayish tint that you only see in someone who's been dead for a while. He sat at the counter, ordered a coffee, and smiled at me with hollow, vacant eyes. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was sick, or maybe he had just stayed out too long in the cold. But when I brought him his coffee, he didn't say thank you. Instead, he just stared at the cup as though he had seen something familiar in the steam rising from it. His hands were cold. Too cold. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just a weird feeling, but as the night wore on, more customers came in, and they all had the same strange look about them. Pale skin, glassy eyes, and a deep stillness in their movements. They didn't speak much. They just sat there in silence, waiting for their orders to be taken. I tried to keep myself busy, cleaning the counters, arranging condiments, making small talk with the few people who actually acknowledged me. But then Alice appeared again, as if she had been watching the entire time. She didn't say anything for a long while, just stood there in the corner, watching me. "Alice, what's going on?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. "Why do they all look like that?" She glanced over at the customers, who were now sitting quietly, each one staring straight ahead, eyes glazed. Her expression didn't change. "They're dead," she said simply. "They've all passed on." I blinked at her, unsure of what I had heard. Dead? Was she joking? She wasn't. "Look," she continued, "this is a diner for people who didn't quite make it to the other side. They're stuck here, lingering, and the diner, well, it helps them pass the time. We don't ask questions, we don't pry. They come, they eat, and they leave when they're ready." I stared at her for a moment, processing what she had said. A diner for dead people. It sounded ridiculous, but as I looked around, I couldn't deny it. There was something wrong. Something unnatural about the people sitting at the counter, the way they moved or didn't move, the way they stared into nothing. "Do you always work the night shift?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Every night," Alice replied, her voice low. "There's a reason for it. You'll see it soon enough." I didn't understand what she meant, but I didn't have much time to think about it. More customers started arriving, each one of them walking in as though they knew exactly where to go. I noticed something odd. No one spoke, not a word, just silence. And when I took their orders, they seemed to already know what they wanted. Always coffee, black, and some form of a late-night meal. A slice of pie, a stack of pancakes, a grilled cheese sandwich. Simple food. The same thing night after night. I tried to act normal, tried to keep my mind on the task at hand. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in a place I wasn't supposed to be. This diner wasn't like any other, and I was starting to realize that Alice's words were true. These weren't ordinary customers. They were the dead, and they weren't going anywhere anytime soon. The next few shifts at Gus's diner were a blur of strange customers and unnerving silence. The dead, if that's what they were, continued to fill the seats ordering their usual meals without so much as a word beyond the occasional mumble of coffee, black. No complaints, no requests, just a quiet, resigned kind of existence. The same customers returned every night, never changing, never aging, and I began to understand why. It wasn't just the customers who followed the rules of Gus's diner. I did too, whether I liked it or not. Alice had warned me, but I hadn't truly grasped the weight of what she meant. It didn't take long, however, for me to see just how serious the rules were. The first rule was simple enough. Always keep the coffee flowing. I thought it was just a manner of hospitality at first. But then I noticed something strange. If a cup of coffee ever went empty, the customer would stare at it blankly for a while before a thin layer of frost would appear on the rim, as if the very air around them had grown cold. If I didn't refill it in time, the frost would begin to spread across the table. It wasn't just the coffee cup that froze. The entire table would start to frost over, creeping toward the customer's plate. Their hands, even their clothing, until they were completely encased in ice. I'd never seen anyone actually freeze. They were already dead, but the eerie, frozen effect was enough to make my blood run cold. As if the diner itself had a way of forcing them to leave once they'd overstayed their welcome. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, some strange quirk of the place. But when I watched Alice serve the coffee with absolute precision, making sure no cup ever went empty, I realized that the rules weren't just for the customers. They were for me too. If I didn't follow them, things would start to go wrong. Badly wrong. The second rule was even stranger. Never, ever ask about their pasts. I learned this one the hard way. There was a man who came in one evening sitting in a corner booth. He had the look of someone who had been here for a long time, a face that seemed older than the others. His clothes were worn, and his eyes, though cloudy, seemed to carry a weight of sorrow. I made the mistake of offering him a conversation, asking him how he'd ended up here. He looked at me with hollow eyes, the smile he wore turning into something much darker. "I don't remember," he said, but his voice was flat, drained of all emotion. "I don't remember anything." I asked a little more, probing gently, trying to ease the silence between us. "Where are you from? What happened to you?" For a moment, I thought he might answer. Then, with a sudden sharpness, his eyes darkened. His hand shot out across the table, grasping mine with unnerving strength. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." His voice was low, icy, and filled with an ominous warning. Before I could respond, he released me and turned back to his coffee, as if nothing had happened. But I could feel the change in the air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my heart raced. Alice was watching from the counter, her gaze steady and unblinking. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was waiting for me to make my next move. I didn't press him any further after that, and I never asked anyone about their pasts again. The house rules weren't just for the dead, they were for me too. The third rule was one I didn't fully understand until it happened. Never leave after midnight. This one wasn't as obvious. For the first few weeks, I didn't even think to ask why. But as the clock struck midnight during one of my late shifts, I had an odd feeling. The diner had always been strange, but now it felt like something was changing. I finished my shift, locked the front door, and began walking toward the back. That's when I noticed the lights flickering in the hallway. The atmosphere felt off. The air became thick, almost charged, and I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. The hairs on my neck prickled, and I turned toward the door at the back of the diner. The door was open, just a crack. I stepped toward it, heart thumping in my chest, and pushed it wide open. The cold hit me immediately, so sharp that it felt like a slap. It wasn't the typical chill of the night air. It was a coldness that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. The familiar warmth of the diner had vanished. That's when I saw it. A shadow stood just inside the door. Tall, indistinct, its features cloaked in the thick darkness. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor, and the figure seemed to pulse, its presence filling the entire room. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, as if it was waiting for me to say something, waiting for me to make a decision. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut. The shadow disappeared, but I could still feel its presence, lingering in the corners of my mind. That's when Alice appeared, moving quietly behind me. "You didn't listen to the rule," she said, her tone grave. I didn't know what it was," I stammered, still shaken. "What was that?" Alice's eyes darkened, and she stepped closer, as if she was measuring me, weighing my response. "The diner doesn't like when people break the rules. It wants to keep things in balance. You've been warned." And that was when it hit me. The diner wasn't just a place where the dead came to eat. It had its own life, its own will, its own rules. Rules that governed not just the dead, but the living. Rules that, if ignored, could unleash something far worse than a simple haunting. I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest after Alice's words. The diner doesn't like when people break the rules. Her warning echoed in my mind, and as the days passed, it became impossible to ignore the growing feeling that something dark lingered beneath the surface of Gus's diner. It wasn't just the eerie customers, the ones who never spoke more than they needed to, who always ordered the same meals, and who never seemed to leave. It wasn't just the strange and persistent cold spots, or the feeling that the diner itself had eyes watching me. No, it was something else. Something that Alice hadn't explained, but that I now understood all too well. I had crossed a line. The events of that night, the shadow, the cold, the whispering darkness that I had felt creeping into the diner, made me more aware of every movement, every shadow. I couldn't pretend it was all just a coincidence anymore. I was part of something now, something I wasn't sure I could control. The next night, I was working the usual shift. The diner was quiet, as always, and the late-night crowd of silent customers filled the booths, their eyes glazed, their attention focused on the plates in front of them, as though nothing existed outside the walls of Gus's diner. Alice was seated behind the counter, as usual, watching the room with that same impassive gaze. She was more than just the owner. She was the keeper of the diner's rules. I knew that now. Around midnight, the diner began to shift again. The temperature dropped, just like before. The lights flickered once, twice, and I felt the shift in the air. It was subtle at first, a slight pressure, like the walls were closing in. Then, there it was, the faint, almost imperceptible tapping sound from the back of the diner, the sound of something or someone scratching against the floor just beyond the door to the storage area. I froze. The tapping continued, rhythmic and persistent. It wasn't normal. I'd heard the noise before, many times, but this time it felt different. This time, the sound wasn't coming from the storage area. It was coming from inside the walls themselves. My heart pounded in my chest, and I took a step back toward the counter, glancing at Alice for any indication of what was going on. She was silent, her face unreadable as she stared into the distance. She had heard it too, I could tell. The tapping, the scratching was growing louder. "It's happening again," I whispered to Alice, my voice barely audible over the eerie sounds filling the air. I didn't even know what it was, but I knew it was far from good. Alice finally turned to me, her expression unchanging, but her eyes flickered with something darker. "You broke the rule, didn't you?" The words felt like a punch to the gut. I had tried to stay in line, kept my distance, avoided asking questions, obeyed the rules, mostly, but I couldn't deny it. I had disrespected the diner, the customers, and whatever was watching me. The figure in the back room, the one who had appeared when I broke the rule of leaving after midnight, it hadn't been a simple warning. It had been a promise of what would come if I didn't follow the rules. The tapping from the walls intensified, as if whatever was in there was trying to break free. I felt the temperature drop even further. The air was thick now, heavy with something oppressive, something ancient. I could feel it seeping into my skin, my lungs, my very being. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice trembling. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer. Alice stood up slowly, her gaze fixed on the walls as the tapping continued to grow louder. "The diner doesn't like disobedience." Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of a warning. "When the rules are broken, something has to pay the price." Before I could respond, the walls groaned, like the diner itself was alive, shifting. The tapping stopped, replaced by a soft dragging sound. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the shadows in the diner seemed to stretch, reaching across the floor toward the back room. I stepped back from the counter, instinctively drawing closer to Alice, who stood motionless, watching the shadows with a detached calm. "What is it? What's coming?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alice didn't answer immediately. She simply watched the darkness as it thickened, swirling around the edges of the room. Then, with a sigh, she turned toward me, her eyes tired but resolute. "The diner has its own rules," she said quietly, "and when they're broken, the cost is always paid." I wanted to ask her more, to demand to know what she meant. But before I could open my mouth, the temperature dropped even further, and a figure appeared in the doorway of the back room. It wasn't a person, not entirely. It was a shape, a shadow, a presence that had no form but was still unmistakably there. I could feel its weight, its force, as if it had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. It was tall, its edges blurred, like it didn't quite belong in the world of the living. It took a slow step forward, and the entire diner seemed to tremble, the shadows creeping toward it as though they were alive too. I took a step back, my pulse quickening, but Alice didn't move. She was still standing there, waiting, as if this was an inevitability, as if this was something she knew would happen. The figure slowly advanced toward the counter, its presence filling the space like a tidal wave. The whispering started again, louder now, filling every corner of the room. The price must be paid. And then, in one smooth, fluid motion, the figure reached out, its hand moving toward me. I stood frozen, my heart hammering in my chest as the figure moved closer. Its shape was impossible to define, like smoke twisting and curling into a form that shouldn't exist. It felt as if the air itself was thickening, suffocating me, and I couldn't breathe. The whispers from the corners of the diner grew louder, their words tangled and frantic, but one thing stood clear: the price must be paid. The figure reached toward me with long, impossibly thin fingers that shimmered like shadows, moving with unnatural grace. As its hand neared my face, I felt a coldness so intense it cut through my skin and into my bones. It was as if it were pulling the very warmth from my body, draining me, sucking away the life force. I wanted to step back, to run, but my legs felt heavy, as though the diner itself was holding me in place, trapping me. Alice hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. She was standing there, her gaze fixed on the figure, her expression unreadable, but there was a sense of acceptance in her eyes, a knowing that terrified me more than anything else. "Alice, what is this?" I managed to choke out, my voice thin and trembling, the words hardly more than a whisper. Alice didn't answer at first. She didn't even glance at me. Her focus remained entirely on the figure, as though this were some sort of ritual she had long since accepted as part of her life. The whispers grew louder, clearer now, and I thought I could make out their words. "You broke the rules," they hissed, a chorus of voices all speaking as one. "You must pay." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a cold, burning sensation that made me stagger back, my vision blurring. I gasped for air, but it was as if the very breath had been taken from me. I tried to cry out, but no sound came. The figure's hand was inches from me now, and I could feel its presence pressing in, like it was pushing against my very soul. "You will be the price," it whispered, the words reverberating in my mind, as though they were being spoken directly into my thoughts. I could feel the weight of its gaze, the pressure of its unseen eyes locked onto me. The room seemed to close in around me. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, they were all shifting, folding in on themselves, as though the diner was no longer just a building but an entity of its own. It was alive, breathing, and it had claimed me. I tried to fight back, to break free from the grasp of the figure's presence, but it was no use. The air seemed to be made of stone, solidifying around me. I could feel myself fading, like a distant memory slipping away. The coldness, the whispers, the pull of the figure, it was taking everything I had. The pain in my chest intensified, and I fell to my knees, my hands clutching my stomach as if I could hold myself together. I couldn't fight anymore. I was too weak, too consumed by the pull of this place, this cursed diner, and then, as if on cue, I felt the weight lift from my chest. The coldness didn't disappear, but the pressure was gone. I looked up, confused, and saw that the figure had stopped, its hand hovering above my head, but not touching. It had stopped moving toward me. Alice finally spoke, her voice calm, like she was explaining something she had explained 1,000 times before. The diner doesn't take without a reason. It has rules. It needs to maintain balance. I didn't understand. What did she mean by balance? What was this thing that had taken hold of me? I had felt it, the price being extracted from me. It had to be over. But why wasn't I dead? Why hadn't the figure finished? The diner, it's more than just a place to eat, Alice continued as if reading my thoughts. It's a place of transition, a limbo. The souls that come through here, the ones who didn't finish their journeys, they're stuck. They're waiting. I shook my head, not understanding. Waiting for what? For me? Alice nodded, but her eyes were tired, her face showing the years of service she had endured. Not just you. For anyone who steps through the door. We don't get to choose who comes, but we're always a part of it. You're a part of the diner now, and the rules, those strange rules you've been following, are just a way to keep it running, to maintain its balance. You don't ask why, and you don't fight it. You just let it happen. I struggled to stand, the pain in my chest subsiding but leaving behind a sick emptiness. I had come to the diner for a job. I'd come thinking I was just serving food to a few eccentric customers. But this was more than I could handle. And now I could feel it. I was part of it. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alice glanced at the figure, still standing near the counter. It was watching, waiting, as it always had. Now? Now you follow the rules. You serve the customers. You keep them fed. You keep them quiet. And when it's your time to go, she trailed off, her eyes distant. When it's your time, you'll understand. Until then, you work. You're part of the diner now, just like me. I stood there, my legs shaking, trying to process everything. The whispers were still in my mind, filling the space like smoke. I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew, deep down, that there was nowhere to go. Gus's diner had already claimed me. It had claimed all of us, and now there was no escape. The figure turned away, its presence slowly fading into the shadows, and I realized, with chilling clarity, that it would always be watching. The diner's rules were unbreakable, its power undeniable, and I was just another soul caught in its endless cycle, a cycle I would never escape. The weight of what Alice had said settled heavily in my chest, like an anchor dragging me deeper into the abyss. The diner wasn't just a place of business, it was a prison for the dead, for lost souls who hadn't moved on, and now for me. I had become one of them. I tried to shake off the feeling, but the knowledge clung to me like a shadow, refusing to leave. The rules, the strange, almost cryptic rules, had been designed to keep the balance, to maintain the delicate order that kept the diner running. But what happened when the balance was disturbed? What happened when someone like me, a newcomer, was forced to join the ranks of the spirits? As the hours passed, I found myself back at my station, behind the counter, waiting for the next customer. The hum of the jukebox in the corner played the same soft melody, the low light from the neon sign flickering gently as the seconds ticked by. The atmosphere felt suffocating, the air thick with the weight of unseen eyes, and I couldn't help but glance nervously at the shadows in the corners. I could feel them. The dead were always there, always watching. I felt my pulse quicken as the door swung open, the small bell above it ringing. Another customer had entered. I didn't look up right away. I knew what I would see. The same pale faces, the same vacant eyes, the same resigned silence. But when I finally did look up, my breath caught in my throat. The person sitting at the booth wasn't like the others. She was different. Her skin, though pale, was alive, almost glowing, with a faint flush of color that hadn't been present in the other souls I had served. Her eyes were wide, focused, not vacant like the others, and her face held an expression that was aware. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The words felt too normal, too casual for this situation. The woman smiled, a sad, knowing smile that sent a chill through my bones. "I think you already know what I want." I felt a lump form in my throat. The chill that had crept into the diner seemed to intensify, and for the first time since I had started working here, I felt something that was more than just the oppressive weight of the diner's rules. I felt fear. I tried to shake it off, to focus on the task at hand, but her eyes never left mine. There was something deep in them, something that made me feel as though she saw right through me, like she knew the secrets of this place that I was only beginning to understand. "Coffee, black," I muttered, falling back into the rhythm of the job, but I knew it was more than that. There was an urgency in her presence, an unspoken truth hanging between us. The diner wasn't just a place where the dead came to rest. It was a place where they waited for something, waited for someone to break the rules, to disturb the balance. The woman leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but commanding. "You're the new one, aren't you?" I nodded, my hands trembling as I poured the coffee, feeling the weight of her gaze on me. "They warned you, didn't they?" she asked, her voice low, almost soothing. "About the rules, about the diner." I nodded again, unable to speak, my throat dry. I didn't know what to say. There was no way to explain this to someone who hadn't experienced it, hadn't felt the suffocating presence of the diner, the strange pull that kept me here, that kept all of us here. "You're wondering how long it will be until they come for you, aren't you?" she continued, her eyes never leaving mine. "How long until you become one of us?" My stomach churned. "What you mean?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. I had a feeling I already knew the answer, but I had to hear it. She leaned back in her seat, her smile turning wistful. "You think you can keep going. You think you can follow the rules and eventually escape. But that's the trick, isn't it? There's no escape." The words hit me harder than I expected. There it was again. The truth that the diner wasn't just a diner. It was a trap, a prison, and I had been pulled into it, just like all the others before me. "The diner doesn't let you leave." Her voice was low, barely a whisper. "It takes you, just like it takes us. It keeps you until there's nothing left. You will serve, and you will stay, and eventually you will become part of it." I stared at her, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. I had been told the rules, but I'd never truly understood them until now. The diner wasn't a place to work. It was a place to belong, a place to fade away, to be consumed by the very thing that seemed to draw you in. I had thought I was here just to serve food, to work the night shift and go home. But now I realized that I was already too deep. The diner had claimed me, just like it had claimed the others. There was no way out. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already nearing the end of my shift, but the feeling of time slipping away felt unnatural. The night seemed to stretch longer than it should have, as though the diner was bending the rules of time itself, keeping me here for longer than was necessary. As I poured another cup of coffee for the woman, I couldn't help but wonder, how long had she been here? How long had she served the diner, followed the rules, and waited for the day when she would become part of the place, when her soul would finally be claimed by the diner's insatiable hunger? "You're already one of us," the woman said softly, almost as if reading my thoughts. "You just don't know it yet, but you will." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The whispers had returned, louder now, swirling around me, pulling me deeper into the web of the diner. There was no escape, and in that moment, I understood the truth. I was just another piece of the puzzle, just another soul bound to this strange, unyielding place. The realization hit me like a wave crashing over me. The weight of it sank into my chest, leaving me breathless. The diner, this diner, wasn't just a place of food and drink. It was a prison, a waiting room, a place where the lost souls lingered, trapped between life and whatever lay beyond. I tried to shake it off, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This diner wasn't about service. It wasn't about hospitality. It was a place where the dead came to rest, and the living, like me, were simply caught in the current, pulled deeper and deeper into its clutches. The woman across from me, a spirit I realized now, sat there sipping her coffee, watching me with that same sad, knowing smile. I wanted to scream, to ask her how to break free, how to leave, but I already knew the answer. There was no escape. The diner claimed those who served it, those who stayed too long, those who followed its rules. And now, I was one of them. I could feel the pull, the weight of the diner's influence pressing down on me, wrapping around me, pulling me closer to its core. It wasn't just a job anymore, it was my life, and I couldn't escape it. The clock on the wall ticked louder in the silence, its hands moving in slow, deliberate increments. Time felt off. It was as if it had no meaning here. The diner had its own rhythm, its own pace, and it wasn't bound by the same rules the world outside followed. I looked around the diner. The faces of the other customers, pale, quiet, their eyes glazed over, reminded me of something I couldn't quite grasp. They weren't dead, but they weren't alive either. They were stuck. They were waiting. "You get used to it, eventually," the woman said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, like she was speaking from a great distance. "At first, it's hard, the rules, the hunger, but in time, you don't even notice it anymore. You don't even want to leave. You become part of it, a part of the diner, a part of the cycle." I wanted to scream at her. "No, I don't want to be part of it. I won't become one of you." But I didn't say anything. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a resignation that I couldn't fight. I had already been consumed. The diner's hunger had found me, and there was no way to fight it. The woman's eyes softened as she reached for her coffee again, her fingers curling around the cup. "You'll understand soon enough," she said. "It's not so bad, you know. You get to keep serving, keep giving, and in return, you're part of something bigger, something eternal." My chest tightened as her words echoed in my mind. Part of something eternal? Was that supposed to be comforting? The thought of being part of this place, forever bound to the diner and its strange, unyielding rules, sent a shiver through me. But I couldn't fight it. I knew I couldn't. The diner had already claimed me, and it wasn't just because I worked here. It was because the diner wanted me. It needed me to serve it, to be part of its unending cycle. I glanced over at Alice, who was still behind the counter, watching me, her gaze calm and unwavering. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I could see it in her eyes. She knew exactly what I was going through. She had been here long enough to know what it was like to be consumed by the diner's influence. "What happens if we don't follow the rules?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, and for a moment, everything felt still. Alice's expression didn't change. She simply stared at me, her gaze steady and unblinking. "You'll disappear, just like the others." Her voice was calm, almost comforting, but there was no mistaking the finality in her words. "This place doesn't let you leave, not unless it's your time." "And when will it be my time?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She looked at me, her eyes softening with a hint of sadness. "Soon enough, you'll know. It's different for everyone. The diner chooses when it's ready." She paused, her gaze shifting toward the back of the diner, where the shadows seemed to thicken, swirling like a storm. "It's always waiting for you, though." I felt a chill seep into my bones as I looked back at the diner. The faces of the customers were all the same, empty, hollow, waiting. They weren't living. They weren't dead. They were just waiting for the diner to claim them, to pull them into its never-ending cycle. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, to escape, but I knew I couldn't. The diner's grip on me was too strong. The longer I stayed, the more I became a part of it. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was my reality, and I was just another soul trapped in its endless hunger. The woman across from me finished her coffee and stood up, her movement slow and deliberate. She gave me one last look before turning toward the door. As she passed, she whispered, "You'll be just fine." She walked out of the diner, and as she did, I realized something. I was never going to leave either.